Por favor, para que iniciemos esta primera mesa del día. Ya tenemos nuestros panelistas listos. Digitalización y reducción del efectivo en la economía. Este panel lo integran Ishwar Prasad. Él es profesor de la Universidad de Cornell, fellow de la Brookings Institute, investigador asociado de la National Bureau of Economic Research y autor de varios libros. Su más reciente es The Future of Money, How the Digital Revolution is Transforming Currencies and Finance. Un aplauso, por favor, para Ishwar. Además está Lawrence Cohen, es una de las principales autoridades globales en finanzas, en inversiones e innovación, profesor de la Escuela de Negocios de Harvard. Ha dedicado sus estudios a temas de tecnología, políticas públicas y mercados que influyen en la estrategia corporativa y crecimiento económico. Él también, además de ser académico, asesora a gobiernos, a empresas Fortune 500 y a instituciones financieras. Un aplauso para Loren, por favor. Nos acompaña también el maestro José Antonio Peña Merino. Él es licenciado en ciencia política por el CIDE, maestro en ciencia política por NYU. Fue profesor en el ITAM y en el CIDE. En 2019, por instrucciones de la entonces jefa de gobierno, la doctora Claudia Sheinbaum, fundó la Agencia Digital de Innovación Pública, la ADIP, y desde octubre del 2024 está al frente de la Agencia de Transformación Digital y Telecomunicaciones. Un aplauso, por favor. Y como moderador de este panel está Daniel Becker, director general de Grupo Financiero MIFEL, vicepresidente del Comité Directivo de la ABM. En octubre del 2023 fue nombrado miembro del Consejo Asesor de la Alianza Financiera de Glasgow para Net Zero, para América Latina y el Caribe. Fue electo por unanimidad por el Consejo de Gobernadores como presidente de la Federación Latinoamericana de Bancos y además fue presidente de la ABM del 2021 al 2023. Un aplauso, por favor. Adelante, Daniel.
Muchas gracias, Ana Paula. Si les parece bien, si guardamos silencio, creo que tenemos un panel extraordinario que vamos a hacer con Pepe. Estaremos hablando en español, con nuestros amigos del extranjero estaremos hablando en inglés, también tienen traductor simultáneo. Y me parece que hoy, en este mundo digital, creo que este panel es particularmente relevante, por lo que les pido, por favor, tomen sus asientos, guarden silencio, y si me les parece bien, le voy a pasar la palabra a Pepe, que tiene una pequeña presentación. Si quieres, Pepe, si te prefieres, como tú prefieras. Y luego también Lawrence y Prasad van a tener sus presentaciones. Y luego trataremos de hacer una unión de cuáles son lo que se puede hacer en México con esta iniciativa que tiene Pepe, qué se puede lograr. Y luego tendremos una sesión de 10 minutos de preguntas y respuestas. Adelante, Pepe. Muchas gracias y muchas gracias por aceptar la invitación. Thank you guys for accepting the invitation to come here.
Vale. Buenos días. Bueno, primero que nada agradecer, por supuesto, la invitación. Nos complace mucho poder explicar un poquito de lo que se está haciendo en la Agencia de Transformación Digital y Telecomunicaciones, que está asociado al tema de pagos digitales. Y aprovecharé también para explicarles una tarea que ayer dejó la presidenta que les explicara, entonces lo haré con mucho gusto. Si podemos poner la presentación, por favor. Bueno. Si no, les voy a cantar una canción, a ver qué hago. Ahí está, perfecto. Pues bueno, la presentación, la anterior, por favor. Les quiero contar un poquito el objetivo. Es explicarles la relación entre infraestructura pública digital, lo que en inglés se llama DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure, Y la idea de pagos digitales, que es una idea que ha circulado desde hace mucho tiempo en el sector bancario y por supuesto también en el sector público, y tratar de aclarar o por lo menos explicitar cuál es el vínculo entre ambas cosas. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, entonces, cuando uno piensa en un ecosistema de pagos digitales, lo que a veces uno no piensa en primera instancia es todo el ecosistema que tiene, o ecosistemas que tienen que ocurrir antes de esto, ¿no? Alguien va, no sé, ¿no? A Perú, que tiene Yepe, o a la India, que es el ejemplo, pues que casi siempre se nos viene a la cabeza, ves a una señora con un código QR para recibir pagos digitales, pero realmente lo que uno no ve es toda la historia detrás, que no seré yo quien lo cuente, seguramente lo contará otro panelista, pero todo lo que ocurrió antes de que este sistema de pagos digitales pudiera implementarse y usarse y adoptarse de la manera que se ha usado y adoptado en India. Quiero hablar de 5, y de hecho están muy mal numerados, pero ese es error mío. El 4 tendría que ser el 1, el 3 el 2, el 2 el 3, el 1 el 4 y el 5 el 5. Entonces los voy a leer en el orden que tendría que ser, ¿no? Lo primero pues, tiene que ser cobertura y accesibilidad a datos. En México hay, al día de hoy, por lo menos 10 millones de personas que viven en zonas que no hay cobertura por infraestructura. Es decir, que no hay torres, cables, microondas, etcétera, que permitan llevar datos a un dispositivo móvil. Y es muy importante lo del dispositivo móvil, porque es justamente la forma en la que con más frecuencia se conectan personas de menores ingresos. Además, hay alrededor de 3 millones de personas, y este cálculo puede variar, que viven en zonas con cobertura, pero que no tienen recursos propios para comprar datos, ¿no? Estas son personas que en estricto sentido no tienen acceso a conectividad por asequibilidad, ¿no? No importa si vives al lado de una torre de telefonía celular, si no tienes dinero para pagarte esos datos, eres una persona sin acceso, eres una persona sin cobertura, ¿no? Eso ya nos da 13 millones, ¿no? Entonces, en primer lugar. Y en segundo lugar, por supuesto, hay un tema en términos de lo que representa como proporción del gasto, el gasto en conectividad. Entonces, una de las cosas cuando uno habla de India, y espero que mi colega lo explique con mayor claridad, es justamente que el paso número 1 es la dispersión de servicios de conectividad, el despliegue de infraestructura de conectividad y la reducción en los costos de conectividad. Si ustedes comparan el costo por giga entre México e India, pues creo que será ilustrativo. El segundo tiene que ver con una identidad digital. ¿Y a qué me refiero con identidad digital? Es una identidad digital que sea transaccional, es decir, que te permita hacer cosas, y escalable, es decir, modular. Y ahí el modelo de India también es el referente claro. Primero, lo que llamamos un single sign-on, es decir, que con una misma cuenta puedas acceder a todos los servicios públicos. Segundo, autenticación con distintos niveles. Cada usuario puede decidir cuál es el uso que quiere hacer de esa identidad digital. Si yo solo quiero hacer un trámite muy sencillo, pues es simplemente un password, ¿no? Una contraseña. Si yo quiero hacer trámites más complejos, pues evidentemente el nivel de seguridad crece y el requerimiento que yo como usuario de mis datos personales autorizo y solicito que se integren también cambia. En tercer lugar, expediente digital. Esto se implementó en la Ciudad de México, es decir, un expediente en línea en donde tienes resguardados tus documentos de manera digital y en cualquier interacción digital puedes hacer uso de ellos sin necesidad siquiera de cargarlos, ¿no? En cuarto lugar, seguridad, y voy a detallar eso. Eso no es solo ciberseguridad, son también los mecanismos de autenticación para distintos niveles de servicio. Quinto, interoperabilidad y asincronicidad. ¿Eso qué quiere decir? Que sea un mecanismo que permite interoperar distintos sistemas de información, sobre todo registros administrativos, ¿no? Sin consolidar una base de datos. Eso computacionalmente es absurdo, ¿no? Cuando uno piensa, no, pues se va a crear una gran base de datos con todos los atributos de todas las personas, pues eso, la verdad, además de que tiene poco sentido computacionalmente, tiene poco sentido en términos de seguridad también, ¿no? Tú lo que haces es asociar distintos atributos, nombre con CURP, CURP con RFC, en fin, a solicitud de la persona, pero no consolidas una base de datos única. Eso es lo que entendemos por asincronicidad. Y finalmente, algo con que ustedes en el sector están muy familiarizados, KYC, ¿no? No conoce a tu cliente. Es decir, que la identidad digital sea un mecanismo para que el sector privado, sobre todo el sector financiero, pueda ofrecer servicios financieros que hoy no puede ofrecer a un sector de la población porque no tiene una fuente de confianza como la identidad digital, ¿no? Tercer lugar, y ya me voy muy rápido porque a esta velocidad me voy a tardar mucho más de lo que tengo permitido. Disponibilidad de servicios públicos digitales, es decir, capacidades públicas, digitalización, simplificación de trámites, infraestructura. Una de las cosas que India, por ejemplo, hizo muy tempranamente es consolidar centros de datos del gobierno para poder tener disponibilidad y seguridad de Aadhaar, que es la identidad digital en India, y ciberseguridad. Cuarto, un mecanismo de gobernanza, y esto es clave. Los dueños de los datos personales son las personas. Y todo el diseño, desde el código hasta la infraestructura, tiene que estar pensado en función de que las personas son las dueñas de su información. Esto significa que es la persona quien solicita y autoriza que se asocien a su CURP, por ejemplo, que es el centro, el núcleo de la identidad. Cualquier otro atributo, así como removerlo, así como quién puede acceder a qué información, ¿no? Es decir, en términos económicos es como el principal, ¿no? Y nosotros somos simplemente los agentes que obedecemos lo que la persona quiere hacer con sus propios datos, ¿no? Incluyendo portabilidad, por supuesto. Si yo quiero acceder a un crédito, soy una microempresa y una banca pide acceso a mi identidad digital o a un atributo asociado a mi identidad digital o a algo que se puede vincular vía mi identidad digital, yo lo puedo autorizar y le pido al gobierno, ¿sabes qué? Dale acceso a esta banca porque yo quiero acceder a un crédito, por ejemplo. Yo ni siquiera tengo que ver la información, yo simplemente abro el acceso, ¿no? Y finalmente, asociar, no unificar, que es lo que les decía, ¿no? No consolidar en una sola base de datos. Siguiente, por favor, y ya me voy mucho más rápido. Y este es el ecosistema de innovación y digitalización que quiere y que ya empezó a implementar la Agencia de Transformación Digital. Se los explico muy rápido. En la base está la conectividad, cobertura y acceso, ¿no? No hay una solución digital posible si no tenemos acceso universal a datos y además a bajo costo. En México el Internet es un derecho y es tarea de la autoridad tutelar que ese derecho se cumpla. En segundo lugar, habilitadores, o lo que nosotros llamamos habilitadores. Es decir, lo que permite poder generar soluciones digitales. En primer lugar, ciberseguridad. Por primera vez, el gobierno federal tiene una Dirección General de Ciberseguridad y un programa de ciberseguridad. En segundo lugar, infraestructura tecnológica, es decir, centros de datos. Como lo anunció la presidenta, hay un centro de datos importante en Aguascalientes y se va a construir otro importante en Tulancingo, Hidalgo. La ley para eliminar trámites burocráticos y simplificación. Si no tenemos una base normativa para poder hacer todo lo que queremos hacer, es complejo. Y esto es ir de la mano con estados y municipios para que implementen a su vez un modelo de simplificación y digitalización en sus entidades y que estén permanentemente acompañados por la agencia. Se votó en la Cámara de Diputados, entramos en receso, se votará en la Cámara de Senadores. La fábrica de software es una fábrica que va a contar con 300 ingenieros, ingenieras mexicanas, mexicanos, para que las soluciones tecnológicas del gobierno se generen dentro del gobierno, como se hizo en la Ciudad de México. Inteligencia de datos es un área dentro de la agencia que provee servicios, sobre todo de soluciones de inteligencia artificial, algoritmos, etcétera. Lo ha mencionado la presidenta repetidamente. El proyecto más importante, o más, sí, más importante, es en aduanas, ¿no? Para identificar casos de contrabando técnico, contrabando bronco, elusión, evasión, etcétera. Y finalmente, dictaminación de compras de tecnología. Nadie puede adquirir o recibir en donación en el gobierno federal tecnología sin que lo apruebe la agencia. Y eso garantiza no sobrecostos, interoperabilidad entre sistemas, etcétera. Todo esto es lo que nos permite hacer lo que hacemos, ¿no? Y en el centro, digamos, el centro chicloso de este modelo es ya BMX, que es la identidad digital, que tiene dos hermanitos, simplificación y digitalización, que van de la mano permanentemente. Y tienes dos salidas hacia la ciudadanía, la administración pública federal o los estados y municipios. Un buen ejemplo, y aquí abro el paréntesis que será breve, es lo que mencionaba la presidenta el día de ayer de la Ventanilla Digital Nacional de Inversiones. La Ventanilla Nacional Digital de Inversiones es una colaboración entre estados, municipios y federación. Y lo que garantiza es que en un solo lugar, que es inversiones.gov.mx, tiene tres etapas. La primera etapa, que ya se liberó, es poder indexar todos los trámites de todos los municipios y estados. Tú llenas un cuestionario si vas a hacer una inversión, con las características de esta inversión. En automático te genera el listado de todos los trámites a los tres niveles de gobierno. Te dice exactamente en dónde, si están disponibles en línea, en qué vínculo, qué requisitos, cuánto cuesta, etcétera. En la segunda entrega es todos los trámites federales digitalizados y todos los trámites estatales y municipales simplificados. Y la tercera entrega, que ocurrirá en noviembre, es el mismo cuestionario, pero en lugar de decirme qué trámites tengo que hacer, lo único que me va a decir es qué documentos tengo que subir. Yo subo una carpeta con esos documentos, la tiro, así, drag and drop, y todos esos documentos se distribuyen atrás para hacer todos los trámites en los tres niveles de gobierno. Y a mí solo me va diciendo qué trámites ya se realizaron. Es más, no tengo ni que hacer el trámite. Simplemente tiro mi carpeta con los documentos, ¿no? Entonces, digo, por eso la presidenta es un proyecto que ve con mucho entusiasmo y que creemos que va a resolver pues muchas tribulaciones. Por ejemplo, el tiempo promedio para aterrizar una inversión en México anda en 2.6 años, 3 años. Se va a reducir a menos de un año, ¿no? Y finalmente, pues las soluciones ciudadanas, ¿no? Es decir, los productos digitalizados y el Centro de Atención Ciudadana 079 como un número único nacional de atención a la ciudadanía para cualquier tema que no sea una emergencia. Siguiente, por favor. Entonces, bueno, les cuento de llave MX como mecanismo de identidad digital, muy rápido, en el entendido de que todo lo anterior que acabo de mencionar lo pensamos como un prerequisito para que esto realmente tenga el nivel de adopción y escalabilidad que imaginamos. Primero, el modelo de gobernanza. Las personas son dueñas de sus datos y deciden qué compartir. Y así está pensado desde el código. Entonces, es una identidad digital del lado de la mano de RENAPO, CURP como la fuente de identidad original desde el nacimiento de cualquier mexicano o mexicana, y llave como la salida digital de esa identidad. Y lanzaremos, yo espero, en poco más de un mes, App México como la salida digital de la identidad digital, ¿no? Hoy hay en México 10 millones de llaves que ya, de personas que ya se dieron de alta. La idea, pues, es evidentemente que conforme se lance y crezca identidad digital en México, pues este número crezca, ¿no? Segundo, una arquitectura distribuida y segura. Los datos están segmentados, tokenizados, es decir, garantizar que nunca nadie pueda tener acceso que no debe, y si lo tiene, que solo pueda haber un cacho de la información, ¿no? Tercero, autenticación digital y KYC, Know Your Customer, para privados. Esto es pensar llave como no solo como una identidad digital, sino como en el caso de Aadhaar en India, como un protocolo para, como una fuente de confianza para servicios y sobre todo servicios privados. Yo hacía hace tiempo muy amigablemente, hablando con fintechs, ¿no? Les decía, bueno, ves que mucho de lo que ustedes hacen, y no es que esté mal, es crédito a consumo, y es un crédito, pues, digamos, más caro, etcétera, ¿no? ¿Por qué no abren un portafolio más amplio de servicios financieros para pequeñas microempresas, etcétera, ¿no? Y lo que me decían, pues eso lo podríamos hacer si en México hubiese una identidad digital que funcionara como un mecanismo de confianza. ¿Mm? ¡Tarán! Entonces, la idea es, cuando nosotros lancemos esto, por supuesto, retomar esa conversación y entender cuáles van a ser los mecanismos en los que podemos aprovechar mucho mejor. No nosotros, las personas, su identidad digital para acceder a servicios financieros a los que hoy no acceden, ¿no? 4, expediente digital, lo expliqué muy rápido, como un vault, una caja fuerte de tus documentos digitales que puedes acceder de manera remota. Y finalmente, llave como firma digital, tanto para ciudadanos como para servidores públicos, como su servidor. Siguiente. Bueno, ahí la imagen no viene al caso, pero aprovecho. Esto es, por ejemplo, si yo tengo llave en App México y no tengo fotografía, ¿no? El usuario, y así se votó ya en la ley de simplificación, de eliminación de trámites burocráticos, puede solicitar que se consulte si en algún registro administrativo hay una fotografía suya. Si se encuentra que sí, puede solicitar que se use como la fotografía de su identidad digital. Y lo que hacemos para garantizar que sea la misma persona es que le pedimos que se tome una foto. Entonces se validan las dos imágenes y se completa la identidad digital. Pero repito, a solicitud y con autorización del usuario. Siempre. Entonces, bueno, ¿qué creo además que se requiere? Pues por supuesto un sistema financiero inclusivo que permita escalar, y esto me parece clave, pagos digitales a otros servicios digitales. Por supuesto, tú puedes construir lo que en un mecanismo centralizado de pagos, ¿no? Y eso, digamos, no es banal, pero es algo que se puede hacer tecnológicamente. Abrir todas las oportunidades asociadas a un sistema digital de pagos para servicios que detonen procesos de prosperidad compartida locales, eso es otro tema, ¿no? El UPI, que es lo que en India, Unified Payment Interface, una interfaz unificada de pagos, de hecho, CODI es un inicio en ese sentido y me parece que un inicio bastante escalable, pero el tema es cómo esos servicios digitales los asocias a otro tipo de servicios financieros, ¿no? Entonces yo creo, o en la agencia creemos, que la generación pública de habilitadores digitales, plataformas, protocolos, identidad digital, debe acompañar los esfuerzos de ustedes, del sector privado, y bajo tutela de las personas, convertir la identidad digital en una fuente de confianza para justamente poder hacer ese puente entre pagos digitales y servicios financieros. Y última, por favor. Hay ventajas obvias en términos de pagos digitales, por ejemplo, bancarización, que en India fue muy evidente, comodidad, reducción de costos de transacción, seguridad, no solo no portas efectivo, sino que en las propias transferencias, trazabilidad financiera como un tema de seguridad, ¿no? Temas de lavado, etcétera. Y esto bastaría, y creo que basta para impulsar un sistema de pagos digitales. Lo que sí no hay es evidencia conclusiva todavía, porque decía un autor indio de un gran libro, que si quieren después les recomiendo, que India es el primer caso de un país que es rico en datos sin llegar a una etapa de desarrollo, ¿no? O sea, lo que quiere decir esto es, todavía esto es un experimento en proceso, ¿no? Pero no hay evidencia conclusiva del impacto de pagos digitales en la disminución de pobreza, o reducción de desigualdad, o microemprendedurismo, o procesos de prosperidad económica locales, o acceso a crédito. Todavía, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que la tarea común que tenemos como gobierno y ustedes en el sector privado y sobre todo en el sector financiero es cumplir lo primero, es decir, sí pensar e impulsar un mecanismo de pagos digitales en México, de, eh, digamos, en los términos en los que lo expliqué, pero crear juntos un ecosistema que también haga posible lo segundo, que junto con los pagos digitales nazcan otros servicios financieros que nos permitan, pues, prosperidad, acceso a crédito, que nos vaya bien a todos, que es lo que la presidenta, con mucha más claridad y elocuencia que yo, llama prosperidad compartida. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Pedro, muy claro. Ahorita, si quieres, ya cuando entremos a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas, entender un poco cómo ves el mundo biométrico, el mundo de INS, que creo que es parte de este journey, ¿no? De este ecosistema. Guys, I'm going to switch to Spanish because in order to be easier with the audience and with Pepe, so if you don't mind, I'm going to make some questions in Spanish. Lawrence, you're going to be tú vas a estar hablando sobre dos grandes proyectos que tú has estudiado y que los has visto con profundidad y has identificado como un banco de gran tamaño en Kenia aparentaba que tenía las capacidades de hacer no solo una digital identity, sino también ser un proveedor de servicios, y parece que no fue exitoso. Y creo que es importante que nos platiques por qué una empresa de telecom fue la que en realidad al final fue la que fue exitosa. Si nos pudieras decir un poco cuáles son los elementos, porque creo que para este público y también, por supuesto, creo que para Pepe sería interesante que entendamos dónde se van bifurcando las diferentes acciones, y por supuesto luego entraremos con otro proyecto. Pero Lawrence, si por favor nos puedes hablar un poco al respecto. If you want to go there or you want to stay here, how you feel more comfortable. You want to stay here or you want to go there to the podium? ¿Te quieres quedar aquí o te quieres ir al podium?
What? Oh, perfect. I can go to the podium. Should I present now?
Of course.
Yeah, perfect. All right, perfect. So thank you so much for the question. And look, I want to present on these two cases, and let me do that by, like you mentioned, I just want to talk about two things. And, we at the Harvard Business School, we really we're doing one thing right. And that is, like you mentioned, by taking case studies and by both writing them down, teaching them, and extracting powerful lessons from them. And so that's exactly what I want to do with these. And so I want to talk about just two. Today, I want to talk about just two. And really, like you mentioned, I think we can learn more, to be honest, from the failure here than from the success. But I'll present both. So let me lay out the setting for you. I'm going to give you two settings. One, we have one of the largest and most respected names in the economy. It turns out to be the largest bank in the entire country. It had branches in all 19 of the provinces, well known. People kept their life savings with them. This was setting one. Setting two, we had kind of a sleepy former government utility. It had then transitioned to kind of a public-private organization, and it was providing uneven phone service, to be honest, throughout the country. Now, both of these tried to modernize their financial systems with a digital product and placement. Now, the answer seems easy, right? If you were to look at this, I think nearly all of us would bet on the first one. We'd say, God, it's got to come from that trusted financial name. The problem is we'd be wrong. And so it turns out that the winner in this situation was not that big bank, which is the Raw Bank. This is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but instead, Safaricom. It was that sleepy utility that ended up winning, and let's dig into why. So, first, let's jump into this kind of Raw Bank. So, Raw Bank started this product named EcoCash, and so it was their digital payment. And again, they were the largest bank in the country. They had the customer base. They had the trust, importantly, the trust of society. They had expertise, but they were lacking one thing that they simply couldn't overcome. And that was that all the players who they wanted to adopt their payment system valued the flexibility, fungibility, and non-tractability of cash. And EcoCash did not do what it had to. It didn't do enough to get them to a net positive on adopting their product. And why? Well, the reason was that fintech solutions like digitization or digital payments, they are not traditional network goods. So network goods in economics are these goods where your use of them makes me better off. So think like a Facebook, think like other types of networks, or TikTok, where the fact that you use it makes me want to use it more. And if you don't use it, then I'm not going to want to use it either. That's a traditional network good. In those types of networks, we just want users, and all users are great, and we'll gobble up as many billions of users as we can get. Here, there's a non-substitutability of players or agents in this network, which is to say, if I get 1 million more users to sign on, 1 million more people to sign up for this EcoCash, if I don't get the shopkeepers to sign up, 1 million customers doesn't equal one shopkeeper. So there's non-substitutability across the different players here. I, in fact, need to get every separate agent incentivized and incentive aligned in order to adopt, or the entire system will collapse. Okay? And so in those types of value chain network goods, you actually need a very different rollout strategy where ex ante beforehand, you have to go to each of them and make sure that they are all net positive. So look, we're in a financial audience here. This is decidedly not a sum of the parts valuation. Right? Some valuations we do, we can just take each part, sum it up, and that's the value. No. Here you can't do that, because even if you have one super high value customer base you're reaching out to, if the other is small, that completely wrecks the value of the entirety. Now, I want to contrast that with this other strategy. Look, this strategy of M-Pesa, we can now tell a success story, but I had the founder in my class. I'll tell you how this started. This started as very much a shoestring project that was supposed to fail. Okay? This can be essentially characterized as an imperfect system when it was launched. It was launched on imperfect rails with imperfect rollout strategy. Okay? They didn't have a great strategy, but they launched an initial product like a good startup might do. And it led to massive success and adoption. How much success? Well, his current estimate is that 70% of the GDP of Kenya, and that's not a typo, 70% of the GDP of Kenya goes through this M-Pesa. When you're that big, forget about too big to fail. You're too big for anything in the country to happen without you. You're sitting in every meeting. You're like the Caesar, right? You can give your thumb up and thumbs down. You're so large at that point that you really have a massive, massive say in everything that goes on. And they did this through this kind of move fast and break things type of startup ecosystem. They didn't act like some kind of a government regulator here, traditional government regulator, but instead they were an innovator. And I'll tell you what's next up for them. So this is not, he came in to present this. I don't even know if this is public yet, but it is now. So their next move is going to be an ecosystem of ecosystem. And interestingly enough, I'll tell you why they're doing this. In Kenya right now, their mobile phones can only hold about 5 apps. And so given that, they need to create apps within apps, which is what they're starting to do to allow users to have maximum flexibility, but still fit in the limits of the hardware and technology. So they have this very innovative ecosystem of ecosystem that will allow them to get into different parts of your wallet, but with all of these different within that space constraint they have. Now, is this going to work on first rollout? Probably not, but they're still going to do it. And so, look, I think the two big takeaways from this, what I'd love for you to take away from both the Aliko Cash, this Democratic Republic of Congo, and contrasting with Kenya, are number one, that digitalization and its regulation, these are frontier sets, okay? These aren't like solving parking tickets where we can just go out and give another ticket, totally fine. Here, these are like a frontier and an entrepreneurship and really an innovative kind of reg tech startup type environment. And that means that they and the successful solutions will be those kind of move fast and break things type of elements. And that means we have to be, if we want to succeed, we need to kind of hold our breath a little bit and be okay with some rocks along the road. And secondly, successful economy-wide digital solutions, they're network goods by definition, but they're different kinds of network goods. And what that means is you need to have an agent by agent or a player by player net positive solution, or they're going to collapse. And so that means every member of that network has to see a net upside such that they're willing to sign up. And that's especially true when you transition from a trusted system, which, to be frank, cash is, into this other system that you're going to be moving people toward. Okay? With that, I really look forward to the Q&A, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Professor Prasad.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. So I think, Lawrence, we have like 2 important lessons that are not necessarily being a bank. That means that you're going to succeed in the digital economy. So I think we have many things to think about it, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that next. And then, Edward, we were chatting yesterday about the infrastructure that India put in place in order to digitalize the economy, what the Pepe was telling at the beginning. And then we were chatting regarding how important it is for population to trust in government in order to have infrastructure, right? I think that's a very important issue to address. And the second, that even though the infrastructure was placed by the government in India, and it was very successful. The digital companies who have the data, and they share it with different players in the marketplace. So, and then you also, we chat a little bit about China and those two big rails that they go through. Maybe you can, in your presentation, tell us a little bit about that. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. We are at the threshold of a new era for money. Back in the 7th century AD, paper currency first emerged in China. You then had fiat currency, unbacked fiat currency, emerging in the 13th century. And in a very interesting twist, China is probably going to be the first country where the use of cash disappears. But it is not just about China. It is in practically every corner of the world where we see cash giving way to digital payments. So why? As Professor Cohen said, we all like our cash. Why are we moving away from cash? The answers are blindingly obvious. First of all, unlike dealing with cash, you have many attributes that digital payments have that cash cannot match. You have convenience, speed, the fact that you don't have to worry about loss, theft, costs are lower. There are many advantages. And of course, in addition to domestic payments, you can link digital payments to cross-border payments. So the notion of money becoming digital, I think, is something that is clearly on the move, even in low-income countries like Kenya and Somalia, as Professor Cohen alluded to. Of course, in real life, with anything, there are costs, there are trade-offs. And some of the trade-offs include that you're going to lose privacy. I could not buy a moderator a cup of coffee without somebody, a credit card company or the government or a payment provider knowing about it. So we need to think about whether we want to move towards that kind of world. And of course, you also bring a lot of activity out of the shadows into the formal economy, because ultimately everything digital is traceable. Now, how can we proceed with digitization? It turns out there are some very simple approaches and some slightly more complicated approaches. A very simple approach, again going back to what Professor Cohen said, is to simply have mobile payments that take place through very basic flip phones. And that is actually working very well in many countries. You can have other forms of mobile money. And of course, many central banks, including China and India, are noticing that people are not using their currency as much anymore. So they're starting to experiment with retail versions of digital money, retail central bank digital currencies. But one can get a little more fancy. One can think about cryptocurrencies like stable coins, which get their stable value from being backed up by stores of fiat currencies, or even take bank deposits, which we all use in our transactions, and tokenize them. Now, a lot of us already use bank deposits for making digital payments, but this could be an added layer of efficiency in terms of using bank deposits. Now, if we want to think about solutions, it's important for us to think about what problem we are trying to solve. And it's worth thinking about what the ideal attributes of a payment system ought to be. As I mentioned already, in the case of digital payments, you want to think about speed, efficiency, very low cost. You need to have very secure verification, the fact that settlement is final. And then one aspect that Mr. Merino referred to, which is that you want to have interoperability across payment systems. In China, Alipay and WeChat Pay have blanketed the economy with low-cost digital payments that everybody has access to. But people use Alipay, WeChat Pay, sometimes they use both, but the two systems don't talk to each other. And when you have a system that is so well integrated into your life as WeChat or Alipay might be, maybe it doesn't matter. But for an economy that is starting from the ground up, this becomes important, that the payment systems are mutually compatible. And of course, you want to make sure that there are steps in place to remove any concerns about fraud. So from a regulatory perspective, there are many issues as well that affect how one thinks about a payment system. You want to make sure that the payment rail has integrity in terms of the technology underlying it, the fact that it is a stable system, that you don't have counterparty risk that creates an additional element of risk in the financial markets, and you want to make sure that the payment system has access to enough liquidity and is governed well. So this is nothing new. I think we all have a good sense of what the key objectives are, what are the key criteria for a payment system. The design is a trickier issue. When we think about what is the payment infrastructure that should underlie a payment system, one can think about Visa, MasterCard as basically setting up payment infrastructures. Cash is a payment infrastructure, but it's a very inefficient payment infrastructure because, you have to go to the bank or an ATM to take out cash. You give the cash to a business, they have to take it to the bank vault. So there is a distribution system underlying even cash. And central bank money is still the key settlement asset. But of course, one can think about second layer solutions, how you use that money in a more effective way. So I spoke about tokenized bank deposits, about retail CBDC. All of those are still going to be liabilities of the respective financial institutions that issue them. But the question of what the settlement asset is going to be becomes very important, especially as we move into a world where stable coins and other cryptocurrencies might start playing a bigger role in the payment system. And of course, from a regulatory perspective, there are the traditional concerns about KYC, AML, CFT that regulators need to worry about. You need to make sure that the liquidity providers have access to a liquidity backstop. If it is a commercial bank doing this, they automatically have access to a central bank liquidity facilities. But what about Alipay, WeChat Pay? They don't have access because they don't have, at least until recently, bank licenses. So who provides a liquidity backstop? How big is it? These are the sort of issues that become very, very important in terms of thinking about how you design this. And the good thing that is going for Mexico is that you're late to the game, but being late to the game actually has some advantages because you can take lessons from many other countries. Professor Cohen nicely talked about some successes, some failures. There are many countries around the world that are experimenting with different approaches. So I think there is a lot for Mexico to learn, but identifying what are the barriers to digital payments, I think is the critical first step. And it's important to think about this is not just about payments. If you think about the Ant Group, it's built an entire financial ecosystem, products for wealth management, insurance, credit, and a whole lot of other things. But this all comes on the foundation built by the payment system. And this is worth emphasizing because I'll talk a little bit about incentives that different players have. If you are a banker sitting in the audience, you may ask yourself, you're making some money by providing payment services. With this new world, you might move to a situation where you're not making much money on payments because cost is going to be driven down. But I think the right way to think about this is that payments are a sort of loss leader. You provide payment services, but that brings in customers, creates attachments that allows you to sell them a much broader range of products. Now, I want to start with the India example before going on to a couple of others because I think there are some very useful lessons in the context of the items I mentioned. And the India stack, as it is called, has three elements to it. One is identity, and Mr. Marino talked about the digital identity that is already pervasive, the payments rail, and the data sharing rail. So the identity rail is really one where everybody in India, whether you're illiterate, illiterate, whether you're in the rural area, urban area, you have a digital identity. And that is very powerful because if you do not have a digital identity, it's very difficult to find a way to deal with the regulatory concerns about AML, CFT, KYC, and so on, while at the same time having access to a digital payment system. So this has been a really crucial element. But this is not just about payments. And as I will mention a bit later, it turns out that this digital identity has other very important benefits in terms of connecting the government to the citizens. So if you think about the payments rail, this is where I think it's worth paying some attention. What India did, unlike the Chinese case where Alibaba, which is a commercial platform, and the Ant Financial Group, and the Tencent Group, which runs WeChat, basically set up private payment networks. In India, the government provided the payments infrastructure. It was a collaboration between the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of India. So they provided a public good, which is the payment infrastructure, but with some conditions. Any private payment provider could operate on it, but would have to guarantee very low fees, and in addition, would have to provide this feature of interoperability. So if two Indians went into a store and they had different payment systems from the store merchant, all of those systems would talk to each other. This has been a game changer because suddenly you have a situation where the government provides infrastructure, but it does not provide payment system services by itself. That is still left to the commercial banks, telecommunication companies, other payment providers. But we now have a level playing field where there is open competition, where everybody has to meet these requirements. And that is really transformative in terms of the payment architecture in India. But one of the elements that comes up here, especially when we start thinking about trust, is what happens with the data that are collected from these payment platforms. Alibaba, which is the commercial platform, provides a lot of data to Ant Financial, which in turn allows Ant Financial to sell a lot of products, including credit products that they can base on credit ratings that are derived from payment platform data. Because Ant and Alibaba can see if you're a merchant, what your cash flow looks like, if you're a customer, what you are buying, how soon you are paying, and data is very powerful. But the question is, who owns the data? And India is taking I think, a very enlightened approach to this by saying that, again, the government is going to license some data aggregators who will pull all this data from the payment platform, and they can even pull in salary and other kinds of information. But then it is you, the consumer, who gets to decide who gets to see the data. So Professor Cohen was running a bank and I went to him to get a loan. Then I could tell the data aggregator, please share all this data with Cohen Bank. And Cohen Bank basically determines, based on those data points, whether I'm eligible for a loan or not. So this is a very powerful combination, but it also has one very important implication to think about, which is, as we design the system, what is the role of the state going to be and what is the role of the private sector going to be? In the examples I spoke about here, especially the India UPI, the government provides the payment infrastructure, but all the front-facing payment services are provided not by the government, but by private payment providers. There are a few state-owned banks that do this as well, but the point is it's not the government directly doing it. If you think about the data aggregators, the government licenses, regulates, but these are private parties again. And that, I think, is very important as we think about the broader issue of how to get digital payments to get traction. And there are a variety of stakeholders here. Households must want it, businesses must want it, financial institutions, the government, and regulatory agencies, they must all be incentivized. Because anytime you make change, there are some people who don't like change. We still like our cash. We would like to continue with life as usual because it has certain benefits. But rather than imposing the system on the country, I think the real question to ask is, what are the incentives that you can give to households, small businesses, in order for them to be able to use digital payments and for them, in fact, to want to use digital payments? And in India, the answer was simple. In addition to digital identities, the government essentially set up digital bank accounts managed by the commercial banks for practically every Indian household. And now the Indian government even makes cash transfers. You know, when I was a kid, we used to get these ration cards that you could take to a shop, that you'd get subsidized rice, oil, butter, and that sort of thing. All of that is gone. Every household in India now gets direct cash transfers, which means less leakage. That is to say, less corruption. And it means that people now have money in their bank accounts that they can very easily use their digital payments for. Businesses, including street vendors, recognize that they don't have to deal with cash anymore, because for businesses, dealing with cash is a real hassle, and they don't have to deal with that anymore. For governments, of course, and this is where things become a little trickier, it broadens the tax base, because all the activity now is drawn into the formal sector, and you cannot easily disguise transactions anymore. So, of course, there will have to be some give and take. But this is where I think the design choices become really important. If the government under Mr. Merino and his colleagues sets up a system where everybody has easy connectivity, where you can easily undertake digital payments in a frictionless way with very low cost, people will adopt it. We've seen this even in a country like China, where there is very low trust in the government, although a little more trust perhaps in private companies. But once you give people the option of being able to do this, and I've seen this in countries around the world, they start moving towards digital payments. So I think as Mexico tries to move towards this digital transformation, which I think will happen, which I hope will happen because I see many benefits to it, it's worth thinking about each of these players and exactly what role they're going to play in this process. So ultimately, I think digitization is going to be good for Mexico. It's not only going to make domestic payments and international payments seamless, but there is one other element which often gets forgotten in these discussions. It is not just about payments. It is not just about bank accounts. In India, I have seen this transformation. What happens when people get money directly from the government rather than having to go to a public service official to whom they have to pay a little bribe to get their money? Now they feel directly connected to the government. If you have access to products for managing your finances in terms of credit, savings, risk, now you feel you have a vested interest in the economy succeeding. So the old narrative that, if India undertakes any reforms, all of the benefits will go to the rich, the political elites, the economic elites, and the poor are left with crumbs. That narrative is changing. People feel more connected to the government. They feel more vested in the country's economic success. They're more willing to tolerate some of the pain and dislocation of reforms. So I think these are important issues, but the right way to approach this, again, is to think about safeguards, because we are living in a world we are losing privacy. Not everybody wants to have a government or a private payment provider have all their payment information. So we need to think about the safeguards that need to be in place. India has one solution for these safeguards. It's not necessarily the only solution. So I very much hope that Mexico, by the time I come here the next time, is well on the path to digitization. But I think the really key issue is to think about each of the elements that is preventing this transformation from taking place, and to design a system where the incentives are aligned for all the parties and you have the right safeguards in place so that we don't move to a dystopian world and in fact get all the benefits that we can from a digital payment system. Thank you.
Creo que no tengo micrófono. Bueno, ¿me escuchan? ¿Sí me escuchan? Sí. Por supuesto. Viendo las preguntas. Estamos viendo las preguntas a través del WhatsApp. No se oye, no se escucha, ya se escucha. Estamos recibiendo las preguntas a través del WhatsApp, por favor, sus preguntas. Y las primeras preguntas que recibo es para Pepe. Pepe, por supuesto, hay una importante iniciativa para tener una identidad digital, para poder disminuir toda la parte de paperwork y que sea mucho más eficiente la economía y darle dinamismo. En este sentido también hay una idea, parte del proyecto sería eliminación del efectivo, ¿o no es parte del proyecto?
Estoy pensando cómo responder. Yo diría que lo pensaríamos como una consecuencia esperada del proyecto, ¿no? Si habilitamos una identidad digital con las características como lo que les presenté, y que además hemos, como decía mi colega, cuando uno llega tarde a algunas cosas es una ventaja, porque aprendes de lo que está bien hecho, pero también aprendes de lo que no se hizo necesariamente bien, ¿no? Y sí pensaría que una transición hacia pagos digitales es inevitable si generas un ecosistema de innovación desde el gobierno y por supuesto en acompañamiento con los privados. Yo pensaría que a partir, digamos, del lanzamiento de la identidad digital, se puede plantear con el sector financiero cuál sería un trayecto rápido y oportuno para mudar hacia muchas más transacciones sin efectivo. Según entiendo, en India hoy 65% de las transacciones, por ejemplo, ocurren sin efectivo, ¿no? El tema es, a diferencia digamos, del lema este famoso de move fast, break things, cuando uno está haciendo estas tareas del gobierno, pues sí se tiene que mover rápido, pero no puedes romper absolutamente nada, ¿no? Realmente lo que tú tienes que generar es un piso, un protocolo mínimo a partir del cual tanto públicos como privados puedan montarse para ofrecer soluciones afortunadas a la ciudadanía, ¿no?
¿Nos podrías decir en este sentido, con lo que platicaste, creo que nos parece muy interesante, cuáles son las lecciones aprendidas para que nosotros como bancos que hemos desarrollado capacidades digitales, que la gente en México confíe en los bancos, no perdamos esto y no tengamos que switchar o que cambiar a una telecom para poder hacer este mundo digital y hacer estas transacciones?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great question, a great point. And I want to follow up on something Mr. Marino said, and that is this. It turns out when they've given a survey to individuals around the world, 63%, this is of last year, still say they want a cash option. What does that mean? That means that we have not provided them with a net positive enough solution that they would get rid of cash. And what that means is that they're not there yet. Okay, we're not there yet with what we can provide them for complete digitization. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get there, but it means that the solutions that exist, even in some of these success cases, have not fully squashed the need for cash. Now, like you mentioned, it's happened differently in every country. And so this, I would say, is the big lesson. Something is going to come up that people trust enough to trust their digital payment to. In the US, that was financial firms when fintech first started. In Asia, that was these large marketplaces like Alibaba and now Alipay, like Professor Prasad mentioned. And in Africa, that's been telecoms we've seen. But it could be any organization. It could be a hospital. It could be some university. It could be any trusted organization. And so in that sense, if banks don't shape up and they're not fit enough to be that trusted organization, then other organizations could come in and provide that service, because I agree, I think with all of us here and everyone in this room, that this is an efficiency increase. And so when some organization figures out how, they will take us to that path to 63%. First saying, so down from 100 to 63, and then eventually, hopefully, to the tens and down to 0.
Perfect. So maybe we have 5 more minutes for you, what strategies can be implemented to incorporate segments of the population with low or no digital knowledge, especially those who are wary of electronic media, for fear to errors, fraud, or loss of their money?
Yeah, it's very important to make sure that any initiative like this is fully inclusive. So if you think about digital payments, even in an advanced economy like the US, there are concerns. Are there people who are, less literate, who live in rural areas, or very old, who may not be able to use these payment apps effectively? And that's certainly a consideration we should keep in mind. But what is striking is the success stories where we can see that people, in Indian villages and Kenyan villages who are illiterate, some of whom are almost innumerate, are still able to use this because the technology can actually be simplified a great deal. If you think about basic payment transactions, that can be conducted with very little technical sophistication using a very basic phone. The one element that is crucial for the trust, of course, is the connectivity, and Mr. Marino spoke about this a great deal. If you feel that you don't have stable connections, or if you feel that you go to use a digital payment and at the point of sale, you're not sure if this is going to work or not, then you have, undermined people's trust in the whole endeavor. So as one thinks about how to approach this, I think the building blocks are very important. Think about what each of the impediments is to digital payments, start working on those impediments, and try to be as inclusive as possible. But I'm a little less concerned about that inclusivity issue right now, based on the way I have seen things developing in countries like India, where, I can go to a street vendor who basically has no formal education at all, and they use their Apps. But one funny story I should tell you is that I was in India some time ago and I was speaking to a street vendor. I was buying a banana from him. You know, it was like 10 cents. But in India, you know, you have to bargain because you cannot not bargain. So I bargained and finally we settled on a price. I bought a couple of bananas and then I looked at his app and said, oh, how's this working? He said, sir, this is working wonderfully. I said, great. Are you saving money with this? Yes, sir, I'm saving money. And I said, so what are you doing with your savings? Do you have a bank account? Do you have securities? No, sir, I'm buying Bitcoin. And he was so thrilled actually that he could actually use his mobile payment. That made me very worried actually. But overall, I think it's a good thing.
Well, I think we're out of time. Pepe, muchísimas gracias. Lawrence, thank you very much. I think it was a wonderful panel, and we hope to see you very soon. And Pepe, hopefully this journey will be very successful for the country and for what you're doing in Mexico. Thank you very much, all you guys.